In this video, I will be painting with watercolor on handmade watercolor paper, and I will give you 8 tips to make your painting work. This paper has beautiful texture and it's very thick. That's why the first thing I'm going to do is wet it on both sides under a tap. My tip number 1 would be get those cotton fibers wet, because it will be hard to wet them with the brush only when you start applying pigment. Otherwise, you run the risk of creating unattractive streaks and puddles in your painting. I use a piece of glass as my drawing board, so I can just plop that soaked paper on top of it. I'm going to collect the excess water on the surface of the paper with paper towels. And I'll tell you, this paper feels kind of like a soaked kitchen towel because it's just cotton fibers. It's basically the same thing as fabric. Now my paper kind of sticks to my drawing board by itself. I will tape the edges just to have a little bit neater, straighter edge. Because paper is wet, this tape is probably not going to be 100% effective, but it will create a nice frame for me to paint on, because the paper, as you see, has that natural edge that the craftsman created during the production process. I haven't framed this painting yet, but I think it will look good maybe mounted without a mat, just with a backing. Alright, I have my watercolors ready. I already sprayed them with some water to reactivate them. And here's my big brush. This is number 24 synthetic brush. And here's my tip number 2. To fill in all the texture, all those little bumps and crevices on the paper, you definitely need to start with a big brush and a good amount of pigment. To give you a better idea of the size, this sheet is 12 by 18 inches. And I'm using number 24 brush. The reference photo for this beautiful, colorful forest I found on Pixabay. I will leave you the link in the description of this video so you can try it as well if you feel so inclined. This paper was a gift from a fellow artist, and I had it in my stash for probably 2 years. I didn't know what to do with it, how to paint on it. I just published a class on watercolor papers, did a lot of research, a lot of experimentation. The class is called Paper for Painting, and there I talk about handmade papers, and I decided it was time to try this piece of handmade paper. If you watch this video till the end, you will see how my experiment turned out. This is the first time I'm painting on this heavyweight handmade paper. Notice how even with a big brush, I get dry brush effect because there's just not enough water on this brush for this type of paper, which is great. That's what I want. But if I had thinner, less textured paper, I would not get that effect for sure with such a big brush. So my next tip would be to pay attention to water control. You want more pigment on the brush than water. Your paper is already saturated with water. It holds a lot of water and you're using a big brush. This is my first layer. I'm happy with the results so far. I was able to get very bright saturated colors, a beautiful transition between different colors in just one go. Of course, the back side of the paper is still wet, so I'm painting wet on wet continuously without worrying about the paper drying on me really quickly. So the colors I used so far, you see on the screen right now. As you can tell, I'm sticking to a fairly limited palette. Right now I'm painting with Anthraquinoid Red by Daniel Smith. But of course, these colors are just the ones I have, and in this abstracted manner of landscape, when you don't stick to copying the reference photo too closely, basically any colors would have worked. So finding darker midtones in my painting and applying them with a smaller brush, again with pigment straight out of the well. I see those areas under the trees are very dark, so I will try to achieve that in one go. I don't want to lose luminosity of the paper. I want it to still shine through my watercolors. So now my paint is very concentrated and I'm working with darker colors. Working on the edges, even though everything is very wet, I'm still working wet on wet. Not all my trees have to be super amorphous, so a small brush helps me to give them a little more texture. Okay, I want the foreground to be a lot lighter, so I picked up excess water there, excess paint. And this will be my tip number 4. Adjust your tonal relationships while your paint is still wet, because on this type of paper, re-wetting an area and trying to scrub the paint off doesn't work. You will pick up the fibers and you will damage the surface of the paper. So you need to pay attention to tonal relationships all the way through the painting and adjust them as needed. And I also wanted to mention that I think those loose, abstracted, wet-on-wet techniques are best for this paper. I think a lot of texture that this paper has will not be good for hyper-realistic, super detailed work. It will be just wrong paper to use. It stays wet for a long time, so you can have soft edges. The colors blend together beautifully with no extra effort. The painting almost paints itself. So loose techniques work best on it. And you see right now I am lifting paint while it's wet. It's not hard to do, but you will see in a minute I will attempt to lift an area that dried a little bit, and you can't really do that. It ruins the top layer of the paper. Okay, I'll let my paper dry. And you can see how much all the colors lightened after they dried. Definitely need a lot of pigment because everything sinks into those fibers. Let's continue working on our landscape. Medium-sized brush, and I am applying more pigment, again, straight out of the wells on my palette. It's very tempting to just cover everything with another layer of paint because that handmade paper accepts it so nicely. But of course, I want to create the texture of the trees, so some areas need to remain light. I'm avoiding them, and I'm darkening certain other areas with more brush strokes. And I'm also going to work on the reflection. There is a lighter area at the shore there, and then it becomes darker and it lightens towards us. So I need to create that gradation, which I do by applying light washes and picking up excess water with my paper towel. Couple more recommendations that I have. I would not use a hairdryer to speed up the drying process of this paper. I would be worried about masking tape fusing with the fibers of the paper. I had to be very careful when I lifted tape. You will see it at the end of the video. And this is very low adhesion tape. So have to be careful with that. And also definitely I would not use masking on this paper. From experience, I know masking is very tricky to work with. It can very easily damage your paper, and this highly textured paper that has a lot of loose fibers on the surface will definitely stick to masking fluid, and when you start taking it off, you will most likely damage the surface of the paper. If you plan on having white areas, paint around them, or next thing I'm going to do with this painting, I'm going to restore some whites with opaque gouache. Alright, let's restore our whites. I see that I need to bring back some of the trunks of the trees that I lost there in the darkness under the trees. I'm using white gouache, and as I said before, working with a small brush on this highly textured paper is not easy. If you add a little bit of water, it's fine. I need tiny little areas painted. Okay, just a few small corrections, maybe a little texture in the foreground to bring it forward even more. Bring back those grasses. And we're done. Let's remove the masking tape. You can see that because the paper is so thick, I had some watercolor seep under the tape, but it's no big deal. I am just going to touch up those areas with a larger brush with white gouache. Normally I would re-wet these areas and just try to lift the paint, but like I said, do not scrub this paper. It does not like any scrubbing. Okay, and our painting is done. Here is the final result. Leave me a comment if you try this paper or if you have plans to try it. Also, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video here on Tamirab Studios channel. Help other artists to see this video by liking or sharing it. To see future videos, subscribe and click the bell button to be notified when they're published. Thanks again and stay creative!